Alrighty, I think we have enough people in the room to get going. We know people will be streaming in across the hour. But is everybody ready to get started? Awesome, awesome. Well, it's so nice to have everyone with us. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. My name's Aja Tukros. I'm a project manager at the Center for Earth Ethics, and I've been so privileged to get to work on this program and our various programs related to the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion or Beliefs 2022 report on the status of freedom of religion or belief amongst Indigenous peoples around the world. We're so excited to have panelists here today, Pavel and Åsa, and to have our moderator from our second event, Roberto, back with us. And I'm really excited to be able to pass this over to Karenna Gore, our executive director, to welcome everyone. So over to you, Karenna.
Hello, thank you so much, Aja. Thank you for your phenomenal leadership and for your role in helping to organize this and welcoming everyone and getting us started. And I want to thank each and every one of you all who have chosen to join us for this really important gathering. I am Karenna Gore, and I serve as the director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. Just to say a brief word about the center, we work through education, convening, and advocacy. Our purpose is to change the prevailing value system from one based on short-term monetary gain, no matter the pollution, the depletion, and the inequity that results, to one that is based on the long-term health of the whole community of life. We are particularly focused on the moral and spiritual dimensions of the ecological crisis. And from the time when our work began in September 2014, the cornerstone has been to honor, learn from, and support Indigenous peoples, including uplifting their spiritual and cultural traditions and fighting for their rights. Last year, on October 26th, 2022, we at the Center for Earth Ethics convened an event centered on this extraordinary United Nations report. The then UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion or Belief, Ahmed Shahid, and his extraordinary team marshaled all of their expertise, talent, and resources toward the inquiry into how that particular concept and mandate, freedom of religion or belief, applies to the world's Indigenous peoples. The result is a powerful piece of work that has within it profound insights on the social constructs of religion and belief themselves, as well as the witness and insights of the many Indigenous communities who consulted and gave to that report, and who have endured genocide, oppression, discrimination, and disrespect with regard to their ways of life. The report also makes clear that within these Indigenous spiritualities and lifeways are the means through which they are guardians of the natural world and the health of the planet that we all share. That first convening was in person at Union Theological Seminary in New York City on the ancestral lands of the Lenape peoples. And in addition to remarks from Special Rapporteur Ahmad Shahid and the incoming Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion or Belief, Nazila Ganea, it featured voices from the four directions of Turtle Island, also known as North and Central America. Tadadaho Sid Hill and Betty Lyons of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Bernadette Demientov of the Gwich'in, Mona Polaka of Havasupai, Hopi, and Tewa, and Francisco Kalisai of Maya Kachikal, who is also the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The topic is so rich that we made the decision to make it into a series. Our second convening was an online side event to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues last spring, and it featured Kiviak Lovstrom, Inuk from Greenland, Donato Bumakas Kalinga from the Philippines, and Carson Kiburo, Endroy of the Endroy people from Kenya. The moderator for that event is also the moderator right now for our third event, for which we are all gathered and so excited. I will introduce him, and he will then introduce our speakers. Roberto Múkaro Borrero of the Guainia Taino Nation, which is an indigenous peoples whose traditional homelands extend through the Greater and Lesser Antilles to the southern tip of Florida in the United States. In 2012, he was traditionally sanctioned a cacique, also known as a chief, as a translation, of the Guainia Taino tribal community. Múkaro has over 25 years of experience in indigenous peoples movements, actively engaging the United Nations system on sustainable development, climate change, biodiversity, and other thematic areas, as well as at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. He is an artist, musician, and writer whose most recent publication, Guahia Taino, We Speak Taino, is now available online, and we highly recommend it. He has done work for and with notable institutions and organizations through the years, including the International Indian Treaty Council, the American Museum of Natural History, UNESCO, United Nations Development Program, PBS, and other notable institutions, including ours. He is currently a strategic advisor to the Center for Earth Ethics, and we are honored that he has worked so closely with us on this important series and has agreed to moderate this discussion. Over to you, Múkaro.
Hahom dito. Thank you, Sister. Taigwe, itiaono, diri, Múkaro, aguebana, moriken taino taka, wainia taino daka, oaidaka, oaidaka, oaidaka. I just wanted to offer a quick introduction in my ancestral language, my Taino language, just acknowledging you all as relatives, relations, expressing that I'm happy to be here, and also just reaffirming what some of Karenna just shared. My home island territory being the island of Boriquén, which some people know today as Puerto Rico, and my tribal community, the Guainia Taino tribe. I'm very happy to be a part of this discussion today with these speakers who are doing such amazing work on the ground in their homelands and outside their homelands, and really impacting the discussion, the intersectional discussion that we'll be focusing on today, which is indigenous peoples, freedom of religion, and really how that impacts our lands and territories and resources. And should be noted that this particular session that we have is also taking place during the time of COP28, or the Conference of the Parties, climate change negotiations that are happening in Dubai right at this moment. And so I think that's important to note, because so much of what we talk about as indigenous peoples, and you'll hear a little bit more from our speakers on how they feel about this, is interlinked. Why I say that is because when we talk about the environment, we don't silo it as indigenous peoples from our cultures or from our rights or women's issues, children's issues, etc. We see them all as intertwined. Yes, we can focus on specific areas, but all of these things are intertwined. So this particular discussion, indigenous peoples and freedom of religion, really links to climate change. And I think you'll see that more as we continue on. But we are expecting one more speaker coming in to the room soon. But right now in the room with us, we have Åsa Larsson Blind. She's from the Sámi community in Sweden. She's the vice president of the Sámi Council. We also have Pavel Sulyandziga, who's Udege from Russia. He's the founder and president of the Botany Foundation. And hopefully soon we'll have Laulani Teale, who's Kanaka Maoli from Hawai'i, and she's the coordinator of the Hawai'i Peace Project. Hope I pronounced that correctly. Well, let's get right into this. You know, we're really basing a lot of our discussion on the report that our dear sister Karenna just mentioned, that was put together by Mr. Ahmad Shahid, who was the former Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion and belief. And a lot of this report came about from surveys. I know that the organization, the Taino organization that I'm affiliated with, United Confederation of Taino People, was a part of submitting survey questions that the Office of the High Commissioner and Mr. Shahid had sent out. One thing I'm noting before we go on, I just want to make sure that everybody knows it's a logistical thing. I apologize for stopping there in mid-thought, but it's very important that I remind all of you that, one, we do have an interpretation feature available today. So if you want to hear the speakers in English, to the bottom of your screen, you'll see that icon, looks like a little globe. Click on that globe and click English, or if you are listening in and you would like to hear the speakers in Russian, we do have interpretation today in Russian, so you'll do the same thing. Click on the icon, and instead of English, just click on Russian. And this way you'll be able to hear in either language. Also, I'll go on and thank our co-sponsors, especially the main organizer of the event, the Center for Earth Ethics. I'll thank the co-sponsors a little bit later, but just thinking about the report itself, I know that our speakers have looked over the report, and I want to begin with Åsa, if you don't mind. Maybe Åsa, you have a pretty broad bio. Shared a little bit here. If you want to share a little bit more about who you are, what you do, please do so. But also maybe a little bit about who the Sámi people are and where they're located, just so folks could get a little bit more understanding of who you are and where you're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to be here and to have this conversation together with you, and also thank you for the introduction. Yes, my name is Åsa Larsson Blind. I'm engaged in the Sámi Council. I have been since 2008, and the Sámi Council, we are an Indigenous peoples organization working for Indigenous rights, Indigenous cultures, Sámi rights and cultures in all 4 countries where the Sámi people live. The Sámi, we are the Indigenous people to the northern Norway, Sweden, Finland, and also Kola Peninsula on the Russian side. So we are a people divided by 4 nation states. And that is, I reckon several of you know what that border obstacles mean for people. So the cross-border collaboration and is very important in what we do. And our vision within the Sámi Council is that we are one people, and the nation-state borders should not put hindrance in the unity of our people. And we work, of course, in Sápmi, that is our homeland here in the Nordics, but we also work a lot internationally, and in the UN and towards the EU, and also we have, of course, also a delegation in Dubai at the moment, working with the climate convention. So I guess that's more or less about us in the Sámi Council, and I will be happy to answer any questions later.
Thank you so much. I want to go now to Pavel Sulyandziga. Maybe the same thing, Pavel, just a little bit about yourself, maybe expand on the bios. Each person, if you've saw the invitation to this, or you went to the Center for Earth Ethics website, we have a longer bio of each of the speakers there, and you can feel free to check that out after this session. But Pavel, anything that you want to share about yourself, your people, where they're located, anything there. Please go ahead.
Здравствуйте всем.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be part of this conversation, to be with you. Thank you, Brother Roberto, for the invitation. It's an honor to be part of this very important discussion. My name is Pavel Sulyandziga. I'm representative of Udege people. This is an indigenous people that lives on the far east of Russian Federation, and mostly we are hunters, we are gatherers, and we have our traditional way of life. Unfortunately, right now, I'm outside of Russia, outside of my traditional land. I was forced to leave Russia because the government of Russia criminalized me because of my activity. They accused me of separatism and of some other heavy crimes. I'm actually head of Batani Foundation. It's a foundation that was established in 2004 in Russia, back in Russia. This foundation was created as a non-political organization. This foundation was created to help communities of indigenous peoples to resolve two problems. One of them is creating of their own economic and social development programs, and the second is to facilitate communities of indigenous peoples to protect their rights, to uphold their rights, while businesses come and grab their territories, and to establish partnership and dialogue and discussions with these businesses. Unfortunately, there was a political organization of indigenous peoples that was uniting indigenous peoples. Its name is RIPON. It's a Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North. But in 2012, this organization was taken by the Russian government, and since 2013, this organization works as just a part of Russian government because it supports all that supports Russian government, and it doesn't tell the truth about the real situation and conceals all the crimes and all the violations of indigenous people's rights. So we were forced in 2013 to raise the questions of the rights of indigenous peoples in Russia, and in 2014 our foundation was named as foreign agent, and in 2017 our foundation was closed by the Russian Supreme Court as an organization that violates some legal some laws. So we were forced to leave Russia, and in 2018 there was a decision to recreate our foundation, and so we registered our registration outside of Russian Federation, and we continue to work outside Russia. And our work concerns works with indigenous peoples of Russia, and also on global level we cooperate on different issues with other indigenous peoples on the questions that Roberto mentioned. I mean climate change, indigenous peoples' rights, etc. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. I believe Laulani is now with us. Laulani, if you're here, yes, please, if you can, just same as the others, introduce yourself, anything more you want to add to your bio, and a little bit about the work that you do with the organization, your people, etc.
Aloha, mahalo.
The Kanaka Maoli people are the most geographically isolated people in the world in terms of water. There's a greater water distance from Hawaii to anywhere else on the planet. We have been occupied illegally by the United States since 1893. And we are working to restore ourselves as Indigenous people and also as a nation, as a country. So we are actively working on that while we are dealing with a lot of corporate and government abuse that comes out in situations like we've just seen in Lahaina recently, where a whole town burned down because of water, a combination of water theft, land theft, mismanagement of land, and a lot of exploitation and government inadequacy, to put it lightly. But meanwhile, our organization works to build communities, to build the resilience of the next generation by working with youth and build community capacity for caring for one another, connecting peace systems, which are very, very important. Almost all of our Indigenous cultures have peace systems, and they're very, very important in not relying on governmental force, on the force of a colonizing government to resolve matters and to be really, truly self-sufficient. I play music with an elder musician, Kupuna Liko Martin. He's a great activist and musician, and I do a lot of other things too: art, cook for a lot of people, and many other things. We're so happy to be here. Mahalo nui loa.
Mahalo. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for that. I want to just bring us back to the report now. The Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Belief, Ahmad Shahid, put together this report after receiving input from Indigenous peoples all around the world. And he came up with, there was a couple of items that he came up with that I want to highlight here before we start getting into some point. One was the idea of, I know it's difficult sometimes for Indigenous peoples to embrace the term religion. I'm just wondering how you all feel about that. I see in the report, the Special Rapporteur highlights the term Indigenous spirituality, and they're consisting of diverse spiritual beliefs and practices that Indigenous peoples identifies as integral to their identity. And then there were certain subject areas that came out in the report. When we talk about Indigenous spirituality, one was the relationship to land. Laulani, you just mentioned that right there. I think everybody mentioned that a bit in their introductions. But a relationship to land, but also in this context of freedom of religion or belief, restrictions on manifestations of spirituality. There was women, equality, and the freedom of belief. Also socioeconomic challenges, civic and political exclusion. He also gets into some best practices and finally recommendations. But let's talk about, some of these issues. Unfortunately, with Indigenous peoples, oftentimes when we hear about freedom, right? When we talk about that in an Indigenous context, we often hear of violations to our basic human rights. So with Åsa, how would you describe the challenges today that Sámi people have when it comes to expressing Indigenous spirituality? What do you feel are some of the challenges? Maybe even elaborate, what are some aspects of Sámi spirituality or religion?
Thank you, Roberto, for the question. And the Sámi people being colonized by 4 different states, we as a people experience a bit different conditions then, depending on where in Sápmi we live. Because nation states policies towards the Sámi people have affected very, very much the living conditions. And basically, a lot of times we are highlighted as privileged in the sense that we have a high living standard. We live in the Nordic countries, and that is of course a positive. But in the question that you brought up, our possibilities to manifest our own culture and have and express both our culture and our spirituality, I would say that living in these nation-state structures, of course, and as a minority in the nation-state structures, it doesn't give us the possibility to kind of structure our own societies in that sense. So colonization has broken the structures, and through history, the Sámi religion, if you want to say so, the Sámi beliefs and the Sámi traditions when it comes to spirituality have been forbidden, and so in that sense, and our healers and spiritual leaders, the Noidi, were forbidden to manifest and to do the practices out open, and this very much being enforced by the church. So in that sense, it had to be hidden, and whatever we could save of these traditions and our spirituality had to be hidden. And now it's very difficult to pick up these pieces when we have for a very long time been forced to not manifest this out open. And now, of course, there's no prohibitions. We can, of course, now express ourselves freely. But due to our history, it's very difficult to bring up these traditions in the open again, and to try to mend these the structures of spirituality. But I also believe that a lot of, as you also said in the beginning, Roberto, a lot of our spirituality as Indigenous people manifests in our relationship to the land, and how we and the way we approach our surroundings, and that we see ourselves as part of and not above nature. And in that sense, I think that we have a lot of those traditions and those that way of keeping our spirituality alive. I think that's because it's so embedded in our culture and our way of life, in our traditional livelihoods. So in that sense, I think that, and that has never been so obvious for others, since we don't go to a special place, to a church in that sense, to manifest and our spirituality. And so I think that in that way, in those in that aspect, I think that we have very much spirituality left still in our culture and the way we live, and in use in our traditional livelihoods. I'm from a reindeer herding background, and so it's so much embedded that we might not even ourselves sometimes recognize as being manifestation of our spirituality, because it's how we see the world and how we approach our surroundings.
Thank you so much. Very interesting points that actually, many of them were actually reflected, that impact of colonization. One is something that Mr. Shahid brought up. Also, I would say a good practice is that, at least in the context of the Sámi, there are no prohibitions if Sámi people want to express their spirituality. I'm going to go to Pavel. Pavel, thinking about what Åsa just shared, how is it for your particular community and perhaps others in Russia, the impact of colonization on the spirituality, on the expressions? Can you share a little bit of that with us?
Thank you very much, Roberto. Thank you very much, Asa, for your very interesting presentation. You know, Roberto, you asked a question, and I would like to start my answer with the following. First of all, you know, I've been a member of a permanent forum of the UN on Indigenous peoples. I was a member of the working group of the United Nations on business and human rights. I was involved a lot in preparation of different documents that were elaborated within the UN system. But you know, the report of Mr. Shahid, well, that report is very good. I can say that with certainty because, again, I was involved and worked with different documents back in the day. And I would like to provide you with a little quotation, something that is written in his report. I will try to quote, "Understanding of indigenous peoples and their various religions or creeds is not possible without recognizing historical and modern manifestations of discrimination, violence, and hostility that menace their spiritual, cultural, and physical survival." The mere fact that Mr. Shahid actually used those words in the preface to his report, the mere fact that he wrote those words means that his approach to the so-called religions of indigenous peoples, and I guess Roberto is right, we should rather use the word spirituality. So this approach is very vast. Actually, it goes beyond understanding of what religion is and how we understand the word religion today. I think that what he prepared and the fact that he had a very vast approach to this issue actually gives him a great credit. I would also like to react to what Karenna said. Karenna said in her introductory words when she said that it is very important for all people, for the whole humanity on the planet, to change their approach generally to how we live, to how humanity lives and develops. You know, I think that very often we indigenous peoples are told that you are backwards, you are always on the way, you hinder economic development, you hinder something else, and so on and so forth. And I think that mentality, spirituality of indigenous peoples can actually help humanity, help it find the way which it should take to develop itself, this way of not greediness, of cultural and spiritual development. I think that it is something that indigenous peoples can share with others, with the rest of humanity. As I have said earlier, my people has a traditional lifestyle. We always say that Udege soul is a soul of a hunter and of a fisherman, somebody who leads a traditional style of life that observes traditions, that worships our spirits, and so on. All of it is preserved. It is still preserved. As Asa has said, of course, unfortunately, colonization could not have a negative impact on the spiritual development of our peoples, on preservation of our traditions and customs. Of course, a lot has been lost. Nevertheless, now we're trying to revive all of it. Of course, it is very hard in the current Russian conditions. Most probably the Russian government is trying to use it in its propaganda and other purposes. But by and large, our people is trying to preserve its customs and traditions. I can say that my community, Udege community, people who are living on the Bikin River, Bikin camp, that is what our specific group is called. My people has always tried to leave people who were coming on the territory. So as soon as new people were coming in, Udege were leaving the territory. And the Soviet government came on my territory in 1927. The revolution happened in 1917 when the Bolsheviks won, and 10 years later, in 1927, the Soviet government came into my community, into my on my territory. And why do I remember that date? Because on the day when the commissioner came to our area, on the next day, our Udege shaman was found. She had hung herself. She had hanged herself. Red Army people were saying that she had hanged herself, but we don't know what happened. That is what we remember that day for. That was the encounter of our community with the Soviet government back then. As I have said, we're trying to preserve it, we're trying to develop our traditions, we're trying to conduct our Udege rituals the way that it was passed on to us by elder generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pavel. Before I go to Laulani, just one question, just to highlight this idea that Mr. Shahid brought up in the report about restrictions on manifestations of indigenous spirituality. Åsa said that in Norway and in Sápmi, they generally can practice if that's what they choose and manifest. Do you feel it's the same way in the Russian Federation? Do your people have the ability to manifest in the way they want, or is there pressure to leave traditional lifestyles and spirituality?
Ну, в целом это официально не запрещено.
Well, it's not prohibited officially, I would say.
Иногда это часто, я могу сказать, российскими властями.
Sometimes, and well,
надо отдать должное советским властям.
I must give them credit. Usually, let's say, often the Soviet government supported it, supported traditions of indigenous peoples, because it actually showed a nice picture of happy and peaceful life of indigenous peoples. It was the case. However, there are often repressions against spiritual leaders who don't agree with the official stance of the government, of the authorities. I can say, for example, that there is a shaman Kechenov. It is Khanty people in Khanty-Mansiysk Autonomous District in Russia. It is in the Arctic zone of Russia. He's the keeper of their sacred lake, the sacred lake of the Khanty people. Oil was found on that lake, and of course, oil producers produce oil there. And that leader is on their way. And some time ago, the fourth or the fifth penal affair was actually started against him. They went to court against him, but fortunately he was never put in prison. Actually, his sentence was always delayed. But now a new process has started, and the threat is that he will actually go to prison. And he is a very elderly person. He is like a granddad, you know, very elderly person. Thus, the government just does. That is what the government does with those who don't follow their line of thought, their orders and their instructions.
Thank you, Pavel, for expanding on that a little bit. Laulani, you've heard what our other speakers have said. How are you feeling, related to the report? What's happening with the Kanaka Maoli society today?
Well, I think in relation to this particular question of spirituality and religion, I think that the Special Rapporteur did a good job of covering that as an element, because definitely I think that all of our Indigenous communities practice religion as daily life, and that manifests really as more of a spirituality. One difficulty that I think is very important to understand is that when we come into conflict with the oppressive governments, the colonizing or occupying governments, often we're dealing with their systems, such as their judicial systems and their administrative systems, and those have particular outlines that make a distinction within their world between spirituality and religion. And in those ways, spirituality specifically is not protected almost anywhere, whereas religion has some protection. And that is highly problematic in many ways, largely because, like many Indigenous peoples, our primary practice of our daily spirituality and religion is what we call pono, or the balance of all things harmoniously, meaning the land, the people, the water, the elements, that aloha or love must be flowing, that there must be care, malama, for all things, and of course, not only is that not recognized, but it can be manipulated quite a bit. And one of the difficulties is in that distinction between spirituality and religion, there is room for the colonial systems to kind of spin the narrative of our belief systems and to define them very narrowly. And I think that it's very important, because it is not the form of what we do and how we do it, but the essence that matters, and so it's not about what chant we say when we go to an area. It's not about how we put the offering, although those things may be very, very important for different lines of training and all kinds of things. The real importance is in our relationship, our humility, our love, our connection, all of those things. Those are what is actually what is actually important, and in especially court systems, it's often degraded. Also the Special Rapporteur brought up the concept of equality in, and I believe that he was pulling that from the ICCPR and elsewhere, that, that everyone should be equal in religion and protection. And that's just not the case. For example, the concept of desecration, right? There's an actual law in Hawaii, HRS 1107. I can't remember the name right at the second, but basically it makes it a crime, a $10,000 fine and possible jail crime, to desecrate anything that is of religious significance to anyone. However, it has never been applied to Kanaka Maoli, despite hundreds and hundreds of complaints. For example, on Mauna Kea, we had hundreds of people filing complaints that I have personally witnessed desecration on Mauna Kea, on our sacred mountain, and absolutely nothing was done. Nothing is done about burials. There's no enforcement of this law for the Indigenous peoples. However, it would absolutely be enforced on a gravestone, on a modern gravestone, or perhaps on a flag, but not our flag, right? Because on Mauna Kea, another thing that they did was there was a small building that was being used to help when people were basically holding the land and preventing the bulldozers from destroying that mountain. They built a small shack and it had a Hawaiian flag on it. And the Department of Land and Natural Resources and Department of Hawaiian Homelands, which is supposed to be putting Hawaiians on the land, came and they chainsawed directly through the flag, totally unnecessarily. But I mean, that goes to show how not only do they not treat Indigenous peoples as equal, but they actually go out of their way to assert desecration. I mean, there was just recently a court case, it hasn't escalated to court, but it's going to, where the 30-meter telescope that is trying to build on Mauna Kea has said that it began construction, which it had to say in order to keep its permit, its construction permit, that it is not ready to use for many reasons. And in that, what they said that they had done that constituted construction was to destroy a Kanaka Maoli shrine. They said that in itself was the construction activity that validated their permit. So, it's beyond, there. Not only is there no free, prior, and informed consent, not only is there no consent of any kind, but there is also an actual effort. I mean, you could say that it is within the realm of plausible deniability, but truly, when you look at all the pieces together, that is when that plausible deniability really evaporates. And you can see that there is an actual effort to destroy the spirituality of the people, which resides in our well-being, in our own sense of pono, in our own aloha, in our own flow of love to all things, including them. there's an attempt to break that in order to break our spirit, in order to destroy our land for profit. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
I think it does. It adds certainly to the conversation. As a Taino person, as an Indigenous person, I can certainly relate to everything you've shared, and also what our previous speakers have shared. I see in my own homeland similar to your situation in Hawaii. In Boriking, in my homeland, we see the difference between desecration of more mainstream, how they support and implement laws of desecration of more mainstream religious institutions, properties, icons, etc. But when it comes to what's sacred to Indigenous peoples, they're not treated in the same way. And this can also extend when you say this destruction on land, even taking us away from our original food sources. In our island, for example, we import in Boriking, 80% of our food product in an island that could, really grow and feed people all year round from its own, from your own relationship with the land. And so our spirituality is also connected to our food, is also connected to the weather, to the climate itself, the forces of nature, if you want to say it that way. Some people say the spiritual or the ancestors. We interact with them daily. So I want to move this conversation now to, this discussion, what you brought up, this impact, right? Laws that are basically protecting the mainstream, but not protecting our Indigenous ways of life, our spirituality. And I want to go back to Åsa. And, there was a situation that happened in your homeland, that could affect this. And this has to do with geoengineering. And I think it's very pertinent to bring this up because, we are meeting at the same time as COP, the climate change, this impact of industry on our homelands and even our spirituality. Can you explain a little bit about what happened and how you feel, or if you feel that these kind of impacts are a violation to Sámi spirituality as well?
Thank you, Roberto, for the question, and also thank you for both to Pavel and Laulani for your excellent input into this conversation. And to your question, because it's so much I could pick up on what has been said, so I will try to stick to the question so we will be within time. But yes, we were alerted, and it's in February 2021, I believe, so it's about some time ago now. But we were alerted by Indigenous colleagues internationally that it was a test that was gonna take place in Giron, in Kiruna, on the Swedish side of Sápmi, and it had to do with testing out technology for solar geoengineering. And it was a Harvard-based research project that was gonna do this test. And it's not many facilities around the world where they can do this kind of testing. They send up rockets and balloons high in the atmosphere. So in Giron, we have a space center that is specialized in these kinds of testing. And we read up on what it was, and we quite quickly found out that the technology and the idea of solar geoengineering, that's basically to create a gigantic fake volcano outbreak that will send particles in the atmosphere, so that you buy particles in the atmosphere and control the heating of the globe. And this, everyone from, I guess, from an indigenous point of view, when you hear that they are, if we put it in the liking of and compare it to a volcano outbreak. I'm not from volcano territory. I probably know Laulani, and some of you might know more about that, but you get an idea of what kind of forces we are talking about. And even I know that you can't control a volcano. So I guess when we read up about what this technology is, we quite instantly felt that this is not what we believe is the right way to go when it comes to combating climate change. And the idea in itself, it's about like controlling the symptoms of emissions. So it's about controlling the symptoms of climate change, not actually targeting the core, the core kind of climate change and what's the so for us, it's not a real climate action, and it goes against what we believe are respectable for us, and how we should treat nature, because we as indigenous peoples, we're depending on natural ecosystems. So what we advocate for is to preserve and restore and secure our natural ecosystem, because that is what has sustained us for up until now, and what we depend on for our generations to come to also sustain themselves. And so we found that it clashes against our worldview, and it clashes against what we see as a chosen future for us. And in the discussions about these climate technologies, we find that it clashes against the majority societies and Western societies' view of there are this settler way of thinking that humans are above nature and are entitled to do as they please, and that they can alter anything to suit the modern society. And in my view, that's the idea, and that's the thinking that has gotten us into the climate crisis and has gotten us into the biodiversity crisis. And for me, Mother Earth is screaming at us now, stop, take a step back. You have overused resources for so long. We need to step back and once again kind of get our society back within the boundaries of sustainability and not overuse the resources of Earth. And now we see that there are the notion and the idea that we shouldn't take a step back. We should to respect the boundaries of Earth. We should instead take it a step further and not only control the Earth, we should also control the atmosphere. And for me, that's outrageous, and it just clashes with what I feel is respectable and towards nature. And I think that also it's in these discussions where we where it comes to show so clearly our different approaches and different way of worldview and how we approach our surroundings, because this is for me never an option. Yeah. So I hope that what you were.
Well, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate you expanding and sharing that with us. I mean, sometimes people hear about geoengineering and they think that this is, part of a conspiracy theory, but you have an actual case that happened there. let me just end with this, and then I'm going to go to Pavel to talk about how, these things have also affect this kind of extractivist ideas, or, I'll go to Pavel next, but do you feel that according to Sámi worldview and spiritual, that it would be considered, from your perspective, a violation of your freedom of religion or belief if they would have went ahead with this?
Well, I just first want to say that the testing in itself was a very small part of the whole thing, but so the testing in itself would not have caused any significant harm to our surroundings or our environment. I will have to say that, but we opposed it because it is part of the development of this technology, and it was a step in that direction. And the project doing the testing had a clear ambition to test out the technology of solar geoengineering. So that was why we opposed this testing, because we do not want to legitimize the development of this technology, and we don't want it to be legitimized on Sámi land. So that's why we opposed that testing. But we have clearly said from Sámi Council that it's not a not in our backyard argument. We oppose the development of this technology wherever they do it. So in that sense, I think it wouldn't have affected this particular place or the Sámi land. We might not have noticed the testing in itself. But I believe that Indigenous peoples have the right to participate in these global discussions on what do we do next? What are the actions that will actually help us combat climate change and take us to a more sustainable future? That's where we need to go. But I think that we have a right to participate in these discussions, not because it will affect us more, but that because it will also affect us, as it will affect all other peoples of the earth. But we also have an obligation towards our land and towards our people to participate in these discussions, and also to bring our solutions to the table. And that's why we raised our voice also in this case, because we feel that we as Indigenous peoples have a lot to contribute with when it comes to these sustainable solutions, and that we all Indigenous peoples have embedded in our traditional livelihood. So I guess that's the background to why we raised our voice in that issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much there. You're talking about responsibilities that we have, and I think that very much links to our spiritual vision, our worldview. Pavel, in the same idea, is your community also experiencing, whether it's a situation with extractive industries, perhaps the mining industry or others, that the sectors are looking at climate change, right? Business sectors and industries moving away from certain past practices into others. And what we've seen in some Indigenous territories, for example, now, lithium mining, for example, goes in, and now they want that because it's part of what they feel would be the green alternative, but it impacts Indigenous peoples. Do you have a similar situation going on, or something in that area that's happening with your own people?
Thank you very much. I will start my answer from a small historical fact. Before the years of 70s, the end of the years of 70s of the 20th century, we had 8 groups of our people, 8 groups of Udege people. Each group had their own name. For example, my group is Bikin Kra, Udege, that live on Bikin River. There are also Hurke, Nurka, and others. We had 8 groups. By the end of 70s, the beginning of 80s, only 4 groups left. 4 groups. We had 8 and now only 4. 4 groups disappeared. At the same time, it was under Soviet Union. There was no genocide, direct genocide. No one physically made us disappear. No one used reprisals. But the only reason was, the tragical reason was this. As I said, Udege, my people, they're hunters and gatherers. And the 4 groups that disappeared, they saw taiga cut down. So all the forest went down. There was no forest. So physically, they remained. But these groups ceased to exist because they could not longer be hunters in these forests. Part of them joined our community. Some of them joined others, but most of them disappeared in the cities. They just joined the cities. Why am I talking about this? The impact on the environment, on our connection to nature, leads to such tragic consequences. Another example, my territory of my community, the Kin River, was attacked from all parts because our territory is very rich in natural resources, because we have a lot of coal, natural coal. Then we have big gold ore mine, and of course our territory, there was no forest cutting down, but still we had a lot of resources. And but of course the forestry, they wanted to have our lands as well. And so when the question was, we received a lot of offers, etc., we decided that it will mean for us a death if we allow them to come to our territories and to take our resources as they did for other groups. So we started to fight. And fortunately, we won. So no industry came to our territory. It's free from any sector. More than that, I may say that in this fight, we were totally unequal. We were minority, and we were if we were face to face with the government, we would have stand no chance. But fortunately, we were supported by many groups and peoples. So we were supported by local communities of other indigenous peoples, not only indigenous peoples, but also local peoples. They realized that taiga must be protected and preserved, and not only for Udege, but for all the people that live there. We were supported by scientists. We were supported by environmentalists and some human rights activists. The fight was enormous. We went to courts. We presented our case, and that time it was still Russia, then before Soviet Union. Then we were allowed. We were allowed to do so. And I may say that our community was, I think, the only indigenous peoples community that took part on the market of Kyoto Protocol. It means that we negotiated, we use this quota, quotes on coal absorption, you know, under Kyoto Protocol. And this was a big victory for us, for environmentalist organizations. And of course, I used my knowledge of the UN system, and, you know, we took responsibility in order to take part in these Kyoto Protocol negotiations, in this deal. We assumed this responsibility to preserve our forests that will absorb the coal and to produce oxygen, to absorb carbon, I'm sorry. And so there was this deal. The government wanted to sell our land. And so this absurd situation came out, and our community took part in this deal, in this sale. And in order to buy our own land from our government, we received money from the German Bank of Development. The German Bank of Development gave our money, gave our grant for us to buy this land from our government, from Russian government, and to preserve this land and the forest. So it was absurd, but still it was a victory. And we got this grant, and we bought the land. And then, while preserving the land, we were selling these quotes to different enterprises. And one was based in Germany, another one in Britain. So the budget of our community, 80% of this budget were this money that we received from these quotes. Why am I talking about this? On one hand, it shows how we have to fight with the government, with colonization, but on the other hand, new mechanisms come up. New mechanisms appear in the UN system on the global level that are important to us as indigenous communities, and we should use them. And I think that this report of the Special Rapporteur, it is one of the mechanisms that we could and must use to protect our rights. Of course, now it's soft. It's just a recommendation, you know, for the governments, for the civil society. So we have to improve the mechanisms of our protection. This is something that what Roberto, what you are doing, what the center is doing, what the organization is doing, this job, this work is really, really important. We need to protect our rights. We need to improve our situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pavel. Just again, linking that, and I would make the case, you know, that these incursions into our homelands in these ways certainly affect our spirituality. Laulani, believe it or not, we're actually almost getting closer to our time, but there's certainly enough time for you to expand on some. You know, you spoke about Mauna Kea and this intrusion on your sacred mountain with the telescope. You also, I think many people who have tuned in are very well aware of the tragic fires, and you spoke a little bit about, you know, how those fires took place. How do you feel, and what, you know, is there anything more you want to expand on that, and how that impacts the spirituality of the Kanaka Maoli people?
Mahalo. Yeah, I think that both of those situations, which are two of many very poignant situations that we are dealing with in Hawaii, both of those highlight many of the elements that the Special Rapporteur brought up. And I think that, and that were touched about by the other panelists here. And I believe that we're all experiencing a lot of the same things. I'd like to look at Lahaina for a moment, just to kind of give people a picture from an Indigenous, religious, and spiritual perspective. Lahaina is traditionally a sacred wetland. Wetland now, this is the irony, right, of a place that went up like a tinderbox because of the dryness. But it is a sacred wetland that was, number one, it was the seat of government for our kingdom for many years. And it was also, it was the capital of Hawaii prior to, during the 1800s. Also, that wetland is the home to a water deity. And what's very interesting is that many of these protective water deities, now this is not the state religion even of the Hawaiian state, right? Because we have our own kingdom, and it adopted Christianity, but it also, early on in its history, but prior to that, there is also a Hawaiian state religion with 4 major gods and, specific elements of worship and things like that. But there are also thousands of these other deities, and those are the ones that the people are still very, very close to, and they're still very important for the land. And very interestingly, a lot of those deities are female water-related deities who are protectors of the land, of people, and of the balance between land and people. So in Lahaina, Kiha Wahine is the important mo'o goddess. She is a kind of a reptilian water protector who also is the determining force of rulership. So that is why the kingdom was located there. So I'm bringing this up just to kind of give the religious background to this, and to show that these religious elements are a whole lot more than merely, just the mode of worship and things like that. Because we did not respect these sacred lands of Kiha Wahine, regardless of what people believe religiously, because we did not respect fundamentally this indigenous deity of water, and that sacred water was instead used to fuel golf courses and hotels. This is why the hotels didn't burn, because everything is water around them, right? They have water features, they have lush landscaping, they have all kinds of stuff that doesn't burn very easily, whereas the homes of the people and the cultural areas and the natural areas and the sacred sites all burned because the water has been stolen from them, that water that belonged to this particular deity according to our tradition. And I think that is very, very important, because while it's very easy to dismiss indigenous spirituality and religion as, folk tales and beliefs and blah, 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 and to specifically locate it in the past tense. The fact is that we as Indigenous peoples are still here. We're still continuing. We still practice these things. We still revere these deities, and this deity, who in this case is a mo'o protector of water, of fresh water, is the same. It just so happens that this massive exploitation involves the desecration of her sacred waters and fish ponds and wetlands, just as Pu'uloa, now known as Pearl Harbor, is the home of the primary protector of the island of Oahu, Ka'ahupahau, the shark goddess, who protects the balance of human beings, sea creatures, and all of life, and so that is one of the most polluted bodies of water in the world because of the United States military, which launches almost all of its wars, including to the Middle East and other places that are not even close to Hawaii, from Pearl Harbor, which is why it was bombed in the 1940s by Japan, and it's why it is the primary target should there be a nuclear attack, which would destroy not only Pu'uloa, Pearl Harbor, and Ka'ahupahau's sacred lands, sacred oyster beds, but also the entire island of Oahu, the entire Pai'aina of Hawaii, and ultimately, because there's no coming back from nuclear war, humanity itself. So when it comes down to it, these easily dismissed practices, deities, and other religious and spiritual elements are at the key of turning the tide for humanity, for the care of the earth, for the balance of land, people, animals, plants, waters, all that is sacred, all that is life, our relationships between one another and how we treat one another. It's all tied together, regardless of where we belong in this picture. I'll end this with a prophecy from one of our kupuna in the 1970s, Pilahi Paki, who said that when the world is in crisis, it will turn to Hawaii, because Hawaii is a key, holds a key, and that key is aloha. It's love. And that aloha has the power to protect our world. And I want to emphasize that when we look at aloha, aloha is something that exists in all of our indigenous cultures. It's what makes us able to live with each other for thousands of years in the same place. We have not killed each other off. We might have conflict at times, but we have means to resolve that conflict. We have means to restore the flow of love between all of us, between us and the land, between us and and everyone, and that is the key that can save can save our world. It can protect humanity. It can turn around the tide of climate change, of destruction of the earth, of destruction of people, overcome this really stupid idea of massive war and militarization that has taken over our world. And the way it needs to do that is through resistance, which is a manifestation of aloha. Make no mistake. It may be characterized as something that is conflict, but in its essence, it is aloha. It is love. It is restoration. It is spirituality. It is religion. And that religion is the balance of pono the restoration of that which all of us depend upon, all of us need to thrive in our world, whether we are from an indigenous culture or whether our indigenous roots have been lost somewhere in time through forced sedentarization. You know, I want to bring that up because it was mentioned in the report, these very important concepts that that are there through genocide, which was not mentioned enough in the report and is not mentioned enough in UN documents in general when it comes to indigenous peoples, through all kinds of erasure that happen. That aloha is still there, and that aloha and that resistance and that balance of life is the key to the survival of humanity and our Mother Earth. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Thank you so much. We're just about out of time. We might have to just go a few minutes over. I think it's okay because we started a few minutes late in the beginning. But I just want to give an opportunity to Åsa and Pavel just to maybe, you know, in a minute or two, any final thoughts on the report, on, you know, how this moves forward. Åsa?
Thank you. And thank you, Laulani, for your speech. That was very powerful. Thank you. Well, I think that overall the report has done a very good job in, as also has been said, in drawing up the complexity of indigenous spirituality and how it is embedded and so intrinsically linked to our ways of life and our cultures. And I think so in that sense it has done a very good job. And it also raises the question of us not speaking as much of spirituality and indigenous spirituality as maybe we should have, and maybe we should. But a reflection on that is that it comes down to trust, because we are colonized people, and we and also speaking from a Sámi perspective, we don't really have the trust in revealing our internal most sacred or and those part of our indigenous communities and our internal societal structures, those that we have been able to preserve for us, that it hasn't been broken through colonization. So it is also about trust for us to start talking about this. And for us to be able to do that, we need to know that they will be preserved, because we have so many unfortunate, so many examples of the opposite, that when they have been revealed, they have been taken or destroyed or used against us. And we have also many. I read a news piece just today about a sacred rock that in the Norwegian part of Sápmi, that a sacred rock have been destroyed by the traffic road authorities in Norway. When they were building a road, they have been destroying this rock. And this is also due to that we don't talk about where these sacred sites are, because we don't trust them to be not destroyed or exploited. And that's why we don't really have the documentation of them, and they can't be protected in beforehand. So it's so complex, these things of actually expressing the spirituality, and because we have so many cases of these sacred sites and sacred objects being taken, and we have them now in museums, and we have several processes of repatriation in Sápmi. But so I think that there are so many layers to this, but I do believe that we should start figuring out how to talk about this in a secure way, in our own ways. Only one thing I would like to raise that I saw in the report that may be lacking, and because I really like this report, it's under the recommendations for the private enterprise, and it says that any of those that would like to use and benefit from indigenous spirituality should appropriately and carefully consider who benefits from it, and also recognize contributions of indigenous people. I would argue that our spirituality and our cultures are our property, and it shouldn't be used by private enterprises, private entities, or any other without the consent of indigenous people. So that's a suggestion for improvement that would make this report even stronger. That for already now a strong report. That's a suggestion for me. So I will end it there, and thank you all for a very interesting discussion.
Thank you so much. I'll go right to Pavel because we just have just a few minutes left. We're actually a little bit over now.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank once again Åsa, Laulani, Roberto, and the center, and all those who prepared such an important meeting together with the Special Rapporteur who prepared this document. Just a couple of words. You know, I have the feeling that it would be important if we, after this report will be published, we start this discussion on how to proceed in order that this recommendation be fulfilled, be really implemented, because they are very good recommendations for the government, for all the stakeholders. So it would be great if we try and understand how this could be implemented, how this could be put into practice. In some countries, maybe it's already an ongoing process. So if we learn about such countries, it could be a very good lesson for us. So thank you very much. I was very glad to take part in this.
Thank you so much to you, Pavel, Laulani, Åsa. Just a wonderful conversation, very important. I think many people don't think about this when we talk about climate change, biodiversity. They don't put the importance of it. And I think that we brought that out today, those connections. I just want to take a moment to not only thank the Center for Earth Ethics for convening this session, but also to our co-sponsors, the American Indian Law Alliance, and also the United Confederation of Taino People. And although there's much I can say in response and just in reaction, I want to bring it right over to Karenna, who's going to provide the closing comments. I just want to say it was an honor for me to be a part of the conversation as a convener, and I look forward to following up with all of you and interacting with all of you moving forward. I know we'll see each other out there in our Indigenous advocacy moving forward. So Karenna, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Múkaro, and thank you to each of these very powerful voices. I know you're speaking also from communities, from places. We're deeply honored to be able to hear your message. This was a profound conversation, very moving. I won't take too long in reflecting anything back, but I do feel sort of compelled to say that in addition to covering so many of these themes that we know were integral to this report about concepts like desecration of sacred places, the intricacies and complexities of distinctions between spirituality and religion, and the need for there to be no appropriation that was brought in at the end of Indigenous spiritualities, the forced sedentarization that has occurred, the intricate ties between land and peoples. All of these things were brought up so movingly. I also wanted to note that, as Åsa said, that when there's suddenly an amount of respect or attention to these traditions, that it needs to be said that they've had to been hidden for so long that it's quite difficult to suddenly retrieve and to bring them up into the open. And that, the manifestation of spirituality in relationship to the land is so important, as Pavel said, that there may be ways in which governments would appreciate having the appearance out there, the cultural facade of Indigenous practices, but when it comes down to a sacred lake, it's a different matter, and the power of the state would come in at that point, and that we have to see that. And that, also with Laulani talking so beautifully about Pono and Aloha and Malama, and sharing these concepts with us, and that saying that, it's important to know that these are not things that are lifted and respected, that in a way that not ensuring the protections that are afforded to the categories of religions is problematic in this way. I also just want to say that in addition to going into to so many of these themes, that each of the three speakers shared very moving stories, very specific examples that I think that we will all take with us. And in particular, of course, Åsa speaking about that solar radiation management geoengineering testing that was going to be done, and explaining so clearly that the objections to this in the place in Sámi lands is not only about that particular effect there, but the knowledge and understanding that this is the way of thinking that has caused the biodiversity and climate crisis, that humans are above nature and can do this, and that Mother Earth, as you said, is now screaming at us, and that you oppose this also because of it taking a step in the direction of this technology. So powerful. And Pavel, about the taiga forest, and that this was it was a victory, and it was one that you fought for very hard, protecting that land, but also there was an absurdity to the victory because of the fact that that money from a foreign bank is used to pay for you buying your land back from Russia for the purpose of carbon sequestration, when in fact all along you're of this land. And of course, Laulani, the way that you explain the what happened in Lahaina, just absolutely heart opening to hear that this is more than just about practices, that there is a sacred wetland with a deity that represents water, and the disrespect that has happened with the water going to the hotels and the golf courses, and the repercussions that have manifested, that this goes back to a very real spiritual reality, was deeply moving. I'm sorry to take a moment to say that, but it just, I felt as if, and there are many other things that happened in this conversation, but these were things that from where I sit were just absolutely extraordinary. And I want to say that we really thank you, because knowing that there is very good reason not to trust these kinds of spaces and these kinds of conversations when non-Indigenous peoples and institutions are involved. Just want to give great respect and thanks for the trust that you all show there, to make the commitment that we want to do this good work together in solidarity, and to say that we want to thank you, Roberto, for thanking our co-sponsors, the American Indian Law Alliance and the United Federation of Taino Peoples, also Union Theological Seminary. I want to thank everyone else at Union Theological Seminary, at Center for Earth Ethics in particular, and the Special Rapporteur, of course, for freedom of religion or belief, and all of the team that works in that office. For Ahmed Shahid, also for Nazila Ganea, they're all doing great work. Jennifer Trudell is somebody that's helped us a lot. Just to say thank you to that team. I want to just close by saying to two people who really have made this series happen and are carrying it through. Aja Tukros, thank you, Aja, and of course, to our dear esteemed Roberto Múkaro Borrero. Thank you so much for that wonderful way that you bring in your own Taino people and story just a little bit for us, which is so beautiful, and also to moderate and keep that all on track. We're so grateful to you. To everybody who's listened, deep gratitude and many thanks.
Thank you so much, Karenna. We're going to close out, and I want to give one final thanks to our interpreters who worked with Pavel. We always consider interpreters part of the team. They are so important to having these type of dialogues, and so we want to just make sure that we honor them and apologize that we went a little bit over, but we really appreciate them. So thank you very much, everyone. We're going to close it out, and we will please check back with the center to keep track of when we will do a follow-up program. We plan to do a few more of these programs before producing, I believe, a report and some other things. But really keep checking with us, and we apologize that we didn't get a chance to answer many questions, but I think you have enough with what these incredible speakers were able to share with us today. So thank you, everyone. Until next time, say Seneko Kakona, abundant blessings to all.